In today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 tips that I used to break through perfectionism that was fueling erythrophobia, chronic blushing for me. So stick around.
Gotta stand up straight, gonna rise like a champion.
Perfectionism and blushing. Before we get started, hi, my name is April. I'm a transformation and empowerment coach. I had erythrophobia for 6 years and decided to start exposing myself, talking about it, wanted to gain control back over my life, which was quickly being absorbed by erythrophobia. I was able to overcome erythrophobia through exposures and body work and other mechanisms that ultimately made me face it head on. It got me to a place of self-compassion and realizing my self-worth and opening up my voice, releasing my voice back into the world and taking back my power. I've worked in executive roles. I've authored 2 books. I also have an ebook. There's a lot of things. I add all these here's what I've done. I've been featured in Fortune magazine. I've done this and this and that to let you know that there's life beyond blushing. And so that who you're listening to is actually qualified to talk to you about the things that I'm talking to you about. I have had the opportunity and the privilege of connecting with people from all over the world who are dealing or have dealt with or have overcome or are suffering from erythrophobia and chronic blushing. Listen, I believed if I could heal myself, then I could teach other people to heal as well. And I've been able to help people with this debilitating condition. At Blushing Phoenix, we empower passionate, creative, and ambitious people who are held back by erythrophobia and other social challenges to show back up, to get over themselves, get past themselves, and get back to living a life where you're thriving on your own terms through transformative action. I can beat erythrophobia, the fear of blushing, then I know that you can too. So I hope today's video is exactly what you need. Let's get started. All right, let me give you a little bit of background before we jump into the 5 tips. So when I was a younger human, I didn't really care much about anything. I didn't really care much about how I live my life, and not in a reckless way, just in a very free and autonomous way of living, I guess. I just was a normal young person, YOLO. When I got older, I didn't go directly to college. I just wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I went into the working world, corporate America, and I started to care a little more about how I was being perceived by others, because it's kind of like a monkey see, monkey do environment. And if you behave a certain way, look a certain way, act a certain way, talk a certain way, from what I was gathering, it seemed like you could get promotion, you could get opportunity for advancement, more money, all of those things. So I started to care a little more about how I was being perceived with the people around me. I started slowly trading who I was for what I wanted. So I started mimicking these people around me, the environments around me. I just started to chameleon and absorb myself into that so that I could get the reward at the other end of the spectrum. I was forsaking myself and my creativity, my expression, and everything that was me for a trade-off of a job. Perfectionism started to rear its ugly head, which I would have never thought to identify with perfectionism. I'm a very much a we'll figure it out type of person. I didn't think that perfectionism was what I was. But in corporate, perfectionism started settling in because I started to constantly just look at the environments around me, check out the people around me, learning to absorb and know every detail of facial expressions and what people wanted me to say and who needed me to agree with them. And you just kind of lose yourself along the way. I believe that perfectionism is part of what reinforced blushing for me, because I was seen by a boss who was an authoritative person with the flushing the first time it ever happened to me. And he pointed out and he laughed about it. And it was this I'm not being seen as worthy and good enough. And so I handed my self-worth over in that moment, where regardless of whether I flush or not, I'm still worthy. But in that moment, I made a trade, and I just believe that perfectionism is a huge rooted issue when it comes to people who blush, and especially perfectionism as it relates to the visual aesthetic, how I talk, how I behave, how I'm perceived. That was really more of my hang up. So here are 5 tips that I used to help me overcome perfectionism and how I look and behave and how I'm perceived by the outside world. Number 1, challenge negative self-perceptions. First and foremost, you need to recognize that your self-perception may be distorted in your own head first, which it probably is. And a lot of times when we have this distortion in our own minds, it's based off of looking at the outside world around us and thinking how we should be, how we should act, how we should talk, how we should appear to look like the group, which is a very normal aspect of being a human. But you have to really start to dive in and challenge those critical thoughts that you are creating about yourself when it comes to your appearance and the way you're showing up in the environment around you. Like, who needs an enemy if you're your own worst enemy? You don't need an outside enemy. You're already doing a good enough job as it is. So you have to start to challenge that negative self-talk and those negative self-perceptions. And ask yourself, when you're having those thoughts, are these based on proof? Is there evidence regarding whatever I'm thinking right now, or is this being influenced by an unrealistic standard? Practice self-acceptance. Like, I know these sound super simple, but often we just need to be reminded, right? So we need to practice self-acceptance. Like, don't get so caught up on your flaws. You get more of what you focus on. So when you're focusing on your flaws, you're focusing on your flaws, you're focusing on what you did wrong, you're focusing on what you look like, you're focusing on how you said a word incorrectly and you can't move on, then you are giving more power and more energy to these flaws when there's so many great things that you're doing. There's so many successes that you've had. There are so many wins that you had, so many strengths that you offer, so much that you bring to the table when you could focus on those things. You need to treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would a friend or that you would a coworker. If a coworker was talking to you about messing up a presentation, number one, you probably wouldn't even recognize that they messed it up. And number two, you would help by being kind and compassionate to them, by helping them get back into a place of self-compassion. Like, don't focus on the flaws. They weren't that bad. Let's talk about how freaking awesome that presentation was and what we took away from it. Do that with yourself. Be your friend first. And remind yourself whenever you get into that place in your head that your self-worth is not solely based on your appearance or how you're presenting yourself or how you're being perceived by the outside world. You are so much more than that. And you're worth so much more than that. And these things that are shifty like that, could I say like that any more? These things that are shifty and quicksand and sinking, those don't get to determine your self-worth, because your image will always be shattered if you attach to things that shift. Number 3, limit comparisons. Definitely keep an eye on social media and media, because if you are a content creator or a creator like myself, or you're in a corporate environment where there is a lot of comparison that happens, sometimes when you're going out there to get inspiration, you can be listening to someone, taking advice from someone, learning from someone, and you start to compare yourself to them, to the way they're speaking, to the way they look, to the way they show up. Listen, I can be guilty of this sometimes. Like, there is a timeline it's more of like a threshold, because I don't really know the timeline. But if I am scouring social media because I want to contribute something back, but I'm trying to get some inspiration, which is always really funny because we don't really need a ton of inspiration from social media. You already have all of that inside of you, but that's a story for a different day. If you get into a place where you were starting the journey of being inspired, you were starting out by getting some creative flow energy going, and now you're comparing, and now you're thinking about how you don't speak well, or you don't prepare well, or you're not structured enough to be talking about this topic, then you've gone too far, my friend. So you really have to limit those comparisons, because you will see yourself as less than, and you will see other people. You will not always know their insecurities and how they're operating, because they look very confident and you don't know what they deal with on a personal level. You don't know what they're trying to overcome. You don't know what their battles are. And so if you get into that place of comparison, you make yourself inferior to somebody. You do it. They didn't do it to you. So really watch that comparison factor. If you're on social media, if you're out there doing some research and getting some sort of inspiration, then be very mindful of when you're starting to put yourself down and elevate other people. Celebrate your uniqueness. And we can celebrate their uniqueness and still honor our own. Number 4, set realistic goals. When it comes to outward appearances, you have to set realistic, and attainable goals for you. And here's what I mean by that. You have to be able to set goals that mimic your personality, your characteristics. So this kind of goes back to that comparison factor, that if you are trying to set and obtain goals, whether that be personal appearance or not, but a lot of times since we're talking about personal appearance, I'm going to reference that. You have to know like who you are, what you look like, what your strong suits are, what your uniqueness is, how you're showing up with those things. So if you have these goals where you want to show up and be yourself, but then you're trying to show up in a blazer because Susie down the street shows up in a blazer, and that's not really what floats your boat, you're not going to feel good about that. I remember when I had my first live news broadcast when I was presenting my book, Lean In. I had on like this really professional outfit because I wanted to show up and be seen a certain way as a professional when I get on live TV and talk about my book. And I had my outfit on before I left the house. It was like these like black trousers and this really nice blouse and my heels. And I thought to myself, I'm like, this is not who I am. Plus, I'm an author, and authors can show up any way they want. So I scratched that outfit and I just threw on some black joggers and some Adidas and a shirt that I felt comfortable in. And I was so comfortable, and that was me showing up and celebrating my uniqueness. And a part of that is me taking my voice back and my expression back by wearing what I wanted to wear. I didn't have to fit a mold to show up on TV. So back to the goals, because I know that this can be a little confusing because I'm talking about personal appearance, but then setting goals and like, what are we talking about here? A little bit of both. So you have to think about what's attainable for you. What do you want? What are the standards that you want? Don't set these goals based on what other people want from you. Now, if you're in a job and there's an outcome that's expected of you, of course, that's going to be in collaboration with your leadership or your manager or whoever, but make it about you and your standards and the goal that you want to set that will still get you to the outcome that they are seeking. When we make our goals based off of what other people are going to think, how good are those outcomes really going to be? Focus on your personal growth and the outcomes that you're seeking and your well-being rather than trying to meet some external expectations. And tip number 5, and probably the most important, but before we get to that, if you are finding these tips helpful, if you're finding this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, comment, tell me your light bulb moment that you've had so far, and are any of these tips helpful? And if you have tips to share for people who are watching the video, share some tips with them. Showing support to this channel really goes a long way. And if you're trying to learn a little bit more about erythrophobia, I do have an ebook out there called Understanding Erythrophobia, Reframing How We View Blushing. That's available in the link below in the description if you're interested in checking that out and getting a little more insight about erythrophobia. It's really like a 101 type situation with some practical tips for helping you move through it. All right, number 5, engage in positive self-talk. You have to develop a habit of positive self-talk. And usually that's going to start by catching those negative things that are coming through. This goes back to some of the first tips that I was talking about. Counteracting those negative things with positive self-talk. You have to remind yourself that nobody is perfect, whatever perfect means. You have to remind yourself that blushing specifically is a very human reaction. It's very human. And it's also not something you can physically control. So when you are shaming yourself and guilting yourself and putting all this negative self-talk on you, like I could never advance in my career, I could never speak publicly, I could never show up to this thing, I could never do what he's doing or what she's doing because I blush, then you're just reinforcing that negative self-talk, which is going to further reinforce the power of that blush. When you start to talk to yourself in a way that is loving and kind and compassionate, your body hears that. Your mind hears that. You're going to start mirroring things in the environment around you that are going to reflect those things instead. And yes, you may show up in a situation and blush and feel a certain way, but it's the thoughts that accompany the blush. It's really, what am I believing about turning red that is giving me this type of reaction? When people tell me that they cannot leave their house, it is truly a belief. What's the difference between a person who blushes and can't leave their house and a person who blushes and is out living their life, enjoying their life, traveling, speaking, writing, or whatever they're doing, sharing their art with the world, making great friendships, in beautiful relationships? Beliefs about blushing is the only difference. And you can take blushing and make that anything. What's the difference between a person who has a very unhealthy lifestyle and they decide one day they're just going to take control of their life. They're going to get in the gym. They're going to clean up their diet. It's a belief system, as opposed to people who are like, I could never. I was just talking to someone the other day because I've been getting some really good sleep, and this will be a whole new video because I think it's so, so vital. I was talking to a friend who was like, I could never do that. I remember a few years ago, I was talking to someone, I had on like these red high heels and red lipstick, and she was like, that looks so good on you. I could never wear that. She wanted to, but she just felt like she couldn't. Why couldn't she? And then I also remember when I cut my hair really stinking short in a pixie and it was blonde, and so many people, when I cut my hair like that, tell me, oh my gosh, that looks so great on you. I could never. Why could you never? Because you limited yourself in your mind. So it's the same thing with blushing. If we reframe the story that we're telling ourselves, if we reframe this talk that's going on in here, if we start loving ourselves, if we were to give ourselves the self-worth, that's why it's called self-worth. It's because it comes from you, not from the outside world. The more we hand that power over to the outside world, the more deflated we become. And guess what? People outside of us will never be able to provide what we need. So it will be this endless cycle of searching for something that you're never going to find, and always coming up empty and always feeling small. That's a bit of a tangent, but these are the 5 tips that I have used. They're very self-explanatory, truly. They're super simple. Again, sometimes it's not about being taught something new. It's just about being reminded of what you already know. So these 5 tips really help me break through that wall of perfectionism, help me be a lot more kinder to myself, help me to assess the talk that was going on in my mind, and help me reframe things and give myself a new narrative about who I want to be, who I am, how I'm showing up in the world, regardless of whether I turn red or not. It doesn't matter. It's what I believe and think about myself if I turn red. That's what I have for you today. If that resonates with you, take it. If it doesn't, just leave it here. I love hearing from you, so please leave a comment below. Tell me what spoke to you today. Remember to share your tips as well. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will meet you back here next week for a new video. But until then, you better rise and thrive.
So rise up, rise